Welcome, everyone, and welcome especially to John. Thanks a lot for coming and for the invitation. This discussion has been sparked by the last article I published on the Symbolic World blog, where I tried to unite a lot of the things I have been working on over the last few years. Lots of things I brought from my graduate studies in panpsychism, then discussions with John, and also some things I learned and discussed with Jonathan over the last year, especially. And John was quite happy with this topic and wanted to discuss it more. And of course, I'm always happy to speak with John. It's been very thought-provoking. It's been almost 3 years since we've been speaking, John. I don't know if you knew. I think the first time we spoke was about panpsychism, and it was about 3 years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was before COVID. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. It was really good seeing you in person and
Yeah.
your wife not that long ago. That was wonderful.
Yeah, that was really nice seeing you and Sarah. Great opportunity to finally meet in person. It was a nice trip. And now, yeah, for today, what we can do to start is I can summarize the article, explain why we want to discuss it more, and then John has many questions ready, no doubt. So it will just unfold naturally from there, I think.
Right.
All right. So the basic idea for the article was to try to unite some of the powerful arguments from panpsychism with other very powerful ideas coming from Christian Neoplatonism, many things that I've been reading about after your recommendations, John. Maybe I think that the last time we spoke with Paul, you recommended D.C. Schindler's book on Plato, and started reading from there and learned many useful things from Schindler that I wanted to connect with previous things from panpsychism. So the basic thing I wanted to keep from panpsychism is its ability to pull people out of a reductionist kind of materialism. I think it does that really quickly by noticing that physical ontology is empty. This idea coming from, defended by mainly panpsychists today. It was also defended by neutral monists a while back, like Russell, where
Yes.
the basic idea is that if you look at any entity studied by physics, what you'll get is abstract relations, and you won't really get any statement about the deep nature of that thing. So if you want to know what an electron is in physics, you'll know that an electron follows certain equations, but you don't know really like what is the thing that is like causing the electron to behave this way. And even if you know its mass and its charge and so on, still really all of what that means is that if you put this mass in this equation or this charge in this equation, then you can get other kinds of behaviors. So you're always stuck at the level of behavior by using just physical language. So I wanted to keep that idea because it allows us to sort of snap people out of a reductionism. You need to look for something that is doing the causing behind the abstract relations.
I like when I think was it Hawking's you quoted, what breathes fire into the equations, which is a really great question to ask.
It's a good short way to put it.
Yeah.
And I mean, classically, many people have been using this idea to argue for panpsychism. The idea being that, well, physical ontology is empty. We need to put something into the hole sort of left by physics. And a candidate that we have for this is consciousness, because in our case, let's say if I'm getting up to go grab a coffee, it would be possible to give an extrinsic explanation of what's going on in terms of behaviors using just the laws of physics, let's say. In theory, at least, it's possible to do that. But this would never get at the nature of what is going on. It's the same idea as with the electrons, for instance. So panpsychists argue that, well, what you could do then is to use your intrinsic viewpoint on that thing. So use, let's say, your desire to get up to go grab some coffee as the thing that is doing the causing there, which you can describe then using physical language, but really the deep explanations for what is going on would be found at the level of consciousness. But there are issues with panpsychism. Some of them are internal to panpsychism, really well debated, such as the combination problem. It's hard to explain how.
You and I discussed at one point.
Yeah, we discussed that, and also other arguments that you brought up to me in subsequent discussions over the first 3 months we were speaking. It's not clear in panpsychism how you can account for forms, entities like, I don't know, the Pythagorean theorem, or other forms in general, patterns that you need to use to describe the world. If you don't give them an existence, then you're cutting off your own access to reality, so you might as well just quit. So it's hard in panpsychism to argue, it's hard in panpsychism to give a really strong ontological place to forms, because it doesn't look like forms are conscious. Like the Pythagorean theorem doesn't change, and it's not material, so it would be weird to call it conscious somehow. And you have the same problem at the very bottom of your ontology if you look at pure potential. And it would be hard to deny, I think, that potential exists, considering that, well, there seems like there's real probability going on in physics at the very lowest layers. And also to speak about, even in the philosophy of biology, if you start speaking about randomness and these kinds of things, that you have lots of work to do if you want to deny that there is real contingency in the world, that there is a notion of real possibility. So it's also hard to talk about consciousness there, because it doesn't look like you have anything. You just have potential. It just doesn't ring true to speak about consciousness. So you seem to have problem. So there are three problems with panpsychism mainly. It's hard to account for the extremes of creation, so what's at the very lowest, what's at the very highest, and it's also hard to account for how consciousnesses can combine.
Yes.
So, I mean, we talked a lot about this through our first 3 or 4 discussions, maybe.
Yes.
And then in these discussions, I ended up moving more and more towards Neoplatonism, where rather than like try to jump right away to consciousness as the fundamental building block of reality, you speak about like those different layers and you try to study them. So you say, okay, well, forms exist, they have to exist, otherwise we don't have access to reality. You also can speak about potential that exists at the very lowest layer of our ontology, and then you can study reality as sort of the meeting in emergence and emanation, the interpenetration in emergence and emanation of those two.
Exactly. Yes.
Streams.
Yes.
So that's sort of what we spoke about for a long time. And what I wanted to do in the article specifically is to try to, let's say, go more quickly from panpsychism to Neoplatonism. And I was able to do that, I think, by using some ideas from thinkers you've been recommending lately, like D.C. Schindler and Answers von Balthasar. And it's an example, I think the core example that they use is also something that you treated in your lecture 18 or 19, I believe, on agape in Christianity, where like it's the example of the mother and her child, because in that example, by focusing so much on beauty and on the emergence of consciousness through love, you are able to see, I think, very deeply into how different layers of reality can coexist and intermesh. So Schindler and Balthasar will explain that it's, if you look at the smile of the mother looking at her infant, the infant initially isn't a full-blown person by any means. Like at this stage, the child is largely potential. It doesn't have a clear sense of itself, of the world. It's in a state of potential, you could say.
It's a moral person, but not a cognitive agent person. Yes.
Yeah, correctly. It's hard to speak of consciousness at this point, really. But there's still something in the child that allows it to pay attention to the beauty that is emanating from the mother, let's say from all of the care that she's going to have towards the child. And especially the example that Schindler and Balthasar use often is the smile of the mother, which shines as a kind of beauty that will invite the child to grow up, to mature into a not only a moral person, but a conscious person. So the consciousness, you could say, of the infant will grow, will develop around this capacity that the child has to pay attention, around the love that the child has towards the mother, you can say. So I think that's a great image to understand how different layers can interact together. You have the love coming from the mother meeting the love from the child, and this is what will allow the child to grow into an actual person. And there is starting from there, Schindler and Balthasar will also apply this to other layers of creation. They don't do it that much. Balthasar does it more, I think. For instance, in Love Alone is Credible, he does it quite a lot, and also Schindler does it a bit, I think, mainly in the last chapter of Love and the Postmodern Predicament, where once you're able to see that the love of a thing towards beauty allows it to grow and brings it into communion with something higher. It's another way to put it as love allows a unity of things that are genuinely different. It allows multiplicity and unity to coexist. And like once you see this at the human level, you can then start to apply it at other levels, including to solve some difficult cosmological questions, like how can God and the world coexist? Then what this kind of Christian Platonism is able to do is to say that, well, God can be different and yet in communion with the world through beauty, through love. And there are beautiful passages that Schindler, I think he relies also on Dionysius the Areopagite there, saying that the way that God causes the world to exist is by emanating beauty onto the world, and then the world sort of pursues God, being attracted by its beauty and goodness. So you have this meeting of emergence and emanation there. And then what I wanted to do was, okay, keeping in mind the first puzzle from panpsychism of what is the nature of physical entities, like what's the nature of things? We can describe things using analytical language. It can be in physics, but we could also talk about other kinds of systems that speak about things abstractly, but we need to know what is their nature. Then the move I made was to say, okay, well, I'm going to use love, starting from the example of the mother and their child, to say that what moves things, like what is the best description of the ultimate reality of things is love, because we can see things loving beauty higher. We see things moving towards things in love. And also we see love emanating from the mother, let's say. So I see love, let's say, emanating downwards and emerging upwards. So I'm able to, let's say, keep the power of almost the snap quality that panpsychism has to make people realize that there has to be something like deeper than just structures, and then move towards a Christian Neoplatonic vision that is old, that is time-tested, that has lots of beauty and richness in it. So that was really the idea of the article. And as you can see, there's tons of influence from you in that one.
First of all, well, thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate that. I think this is very interesting, and not more than interesting. I think this argument is beautiful. And I do, like I said in the comment, I think this is your best work. And so first, I want to do things that are not meant in any way as challenges. They're more attempts to get clarification. There's two things. So let me just give a little bit of an overview. One is to get very clear how you're using the notion of love. And so part of it is to be very clear about, first of all, in the human situation, what love is. And then secondly, as I mentioned, and the Neoplatonic tradition, and especially the Christian Platonic tradition had what I call the four L's. There's love, and these are the four identity claims that are made of God. There's light, and there's life, and of course, there's famously logos. And so I think the two questions are also interrelated, that I would like an explication of love in the human situation that integrates it with life and light and logos, such that it can be appropriately applied to the ontological situation. Because one thing you could be mistaken for saying is, well, he's gone from, sort of a panpsychism to a sort of just an animism in which everything is loving everything else, and everything is sort of has emotions and feelings. And it was like, and I think that would be to misapprehend your argument in a fundamental way. And so first of all, I want to just draw this out. So let me start. So one of the, and then I think, Schindler and von Balthasar would be very much in agreement with what I'm going to say now. Our culture is very confused about love. We tend to think of love as a feeling, which is a very mistaken idea, because feelings are not the same thing as emotions, right? A feeling is exactly that, right? Where emotion has motion in it. It's about your committed behavior. And then even at that point, love isn't an emotion. Love is an existential stance, because if I love someone, I can have the emotion of anger or jealousy or joy or sadness. So I love my partner and she's away. And so I have the emotion of sadness, which I feel as a kind of contraction in my chest and a lowering of my energy. But to think that the love is captured by that contraction of my chest and the lowering of my energy, or even that it is captured by my sadness, is a category mistake. Is that okay so far as an argument? Right. Yes. So we're trying to point to something that's much more about how things are oriented existentially towards each other. And then I want to bring out the point that you made with the example of the mother. And I just want to really sort of expand on this, because there's also a framework that has to be let go of. Descartes tells us that we start in self-consciousness and move out to other minds. That's exactly the opposite of the developmental story that we actually see. We see we see entities, like you said, the baby that does not possess self-consciousness. And what it does is babies first learn to pick up on the mental states of others. And they have to get really good at that. They're about 3, almost 4. And then they can introspect. And what they can do is internalize the perspective of others and gain a capacity for self-reflection and self-consciousness. So the picture is exactly the opposite of the Cartesian framework. So, I mean, we like to think our origin is this point, this nucleus of self-consciousness, and that we're trying to reach out towards the world. And that is not an accurate account of how the development actually unfolds. So let's put those two things together. There's an orientation stance, and we actually become self-conscious. Clearman would argue even we become conscious through the ability, that looping through other people. Is that okay so far?
Yes.
Right. So when you say that, right, there's a love relationship between form and potential. And by the way, just an aside, that thing about the fire, what breathes fire into the equations, that is a good way of challenging the idea that what Plato meant by the forms was just abstract formalisms. Plato doesn't mean that. He means, right, exactly. So just to bring that in. So what breathes fire into the formulas, or the equations, even a better word, and right, is somehow bound up with the emergence up and the emanation down. Is that correct so far?
Yes.
So what is it? So we are stepping, we're in the proper sense, we're abstracting. We're saying human love is an exemplary instance of what we're talking about. We're not saying that everything is an instance of that. We're saying the opposite. At least that's what I'm hearing you say. You could be understood to be saying one of two things. Everything is an instance of human love, or you could be saying human love is an instance of some other broader ontological relationship. And I take you to be saying the second rather than the first. Correct. Is that fair? Yes. Okay. So what we need to do is, like, what is it that you want to be seeing in love that can be abstracted in the proper sense of the word, not into cold formalisms? We want to keep the fire, right? What is it that's being abstracted out that can be applied directly to the ontological relationship between form and potential, between emanation and emergence? I know that was a very long question, but you do see what I was trying to do with it?
Yes.
I was trying to like break it out, and I was trying to get it out of feeling and an emotion and into an existential stance, a relationship, and then how does that generalize, right? So that we're properly seeing human love as an instance of something more universal rather than the reverse.
Yes, yes. Yeah, good point. I think I'm going to start with how Schindler describes love being related to the Transcendentals.
Yes, yes. I think that excellent proposal. Let's begin there.
Because Schindler will explain that love is primarily related to beauty. Like first, what will happen is that he even writes that love is caused by beauty. So once we are attracted, we start at the human level, let's say. Once we are attracted towards something beautiful, this awakens a kind of love in us that brings us towards that thing. So it involves both our appetite and our intellect. That's how we say it. There is something intelligible in the thing that we find beautiful. It's not just a sort of blind romantic attraction towards something.
Yes.
There is truth.
We are drawn.
Sorry. Yes. There is truth that will ultimately be revealed, but Schindler will see truth as being revealed at the end of this movement. So initially, we're drawn in love towards beauty. This sort of drawing, this moving that this does in us has to do with our will towards something that is good. So then this, ultimately, Schindler doesn't say that good, like our attraction to the good has only to do with, let's say, our will and not our intellect, but let's say goodness will still move the will, and it would be easy to sort of stay there. Schiller doesn't want to. Ultimately, he thinks that beauty will resolve all of the, beauty will allow all of the poles to coexist. So we are attracted towards the good, and in this movement towards the good, ultimately we will reach the thing, which will then disclose its truth. So we have access to the logos, that L that one of those other L's that you mentioned.
Yes. I guess, sorry to interrupt, but I want to slow it down.
Yeah.
So, and I know Schindler like explicitly says he's using, the method of analogy, right?
Yeah.
And of course, even, Nietzsche is using will to power. He's willing to use psychological terms ontologically. Goes back to Fichte, probably, who starts that progression. But what I'm trying to get at, without reverting to panpsychism, in what way do inanimate things, in what way are inanimate things drawn by beauty?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
It's easier, I think, to do with goodness. So maybe we can like try to go there at least temporarily, because I think it was a very old idea. You can find it in Aquinas and probably way before, that everything moves towards its good, so that even a stone moving down a hill would be moving towards its good. And this requires some adjustments today, because we don't, let's say, keep just Aristotelian science. But I think we can recover at least this still sense of teleology, just in like the basic fact that, and we've talked about this mainly with Paul, that if you look at any equations, any equation, let's say how an electron behaves, the fact that it's an intelligible relation, we can write it down into an equation. There is something that the electron will do in this kind of scenario, even if we have to use probabilities. There is something towards which the electron is moving. We use probabilities to describe it, but it's a movement of the electron. It's moving towards its good, we can say. Obviously, this is not going to be the same kind of good as like it is for me to raise a child correctly, for instance. It's a much lower kind, but I don't think that Aquinas or the others were falling into the kind of panpsychist issue there of taking a human good and putting it into what's happening in the stone. And I want to do the same kind of thing with beauty too, saying that Obviously, there's a lot more when I am drawn towards something beautiful, when I love something beautiful, but still, and I don't, and it's hard for me to specify like what this would be exactly for an electron to
Yeah.
love protons and to dislike other electrons, let's say. But there's something about this, and also it's good. Okay, let's not just talk about goodness. Let's try to bring in logos as well, because it is in doing, let's say, it is in moving towards it's good that the electron will exhibit the pattern of the electron that we can quantify and turn into an equation. There is a structure there. There is a logos to the electron that is disclosed by the electron moving towards its good. So I'm not sure how like satisfyingly this can answer your question,
Well,
but I think I can draw the analogy.
well, it's not unsatisfactory. We're doing something very exploratory. Like I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm trying to. I'm trying to. Okay, so I'm trying to. There's a bunch of things that I sense them moving towards. I don't know if I can articulate it, but I'll try. Okay, so one of the things DC Schindler talks about, which I think has been very, very powerful. I talk about him challenging the hermeneutics of suspicion with the hermeneutics of beauty, where beauty is a way of describing how appearances, right, are actually disclosing of reality rather than distorting or distracting from reality, right? And then the idea that I've been trying to get at with that is this: I've been about the what I call trying to get a phenomenology of the Platonic forms, is this idea of, so here's all the appearances of this, right? All the aspects, right? And we don't actually ever see the whole object. We can't, because every aspect reveals and conceals, right?
Yeah.
And so there is what I call the through line. This is what, because the original meaning of eidos was the look of something, its aspect, right? But what I think what Plato was doing is he was trying to get at this idea that, and this is influenced by Merleau-Ponty. Just give me a sec, because this will go somewhere. Okay, right? The idea that there's a through line to this that is not itself any aspect. It is that which binds all possible aspects together, and there's an inexhaustibleness to this. Right, it's like a melody that strings all the notes together. All the notes are an appearance of the melody, right? They disclose the melody because there's a through line that runs through them. Is that, does that make sense so far?
Yes. Yes.
Right, and so for me, part of what is going on when we're talking about love is that we have bound ourselves to the through line of a person, in that we're taking all of their aspects and all of their appearances. We are comporting ourselves so that we can see through, in the sense of by means of and beyond, all of the aspects and all of the appearances. And in that sense, we're not grasping, better word, we're realizing the beauty of the person because we have found ourselves drawn into the through line. Is that?
Yes. Yes, that's good.
And so I see that process, and you can see both logos and love as our experience of logos and our experience of love are different ways of talking about that. Is that okay so far?
Yes. Yes.
And so for me, what I say is, what I'm having in love, when I'm experiencing love, I have this particular stance, particular relationship that in which I'm caught up in the through line. And when I'm in dialogos, I'm also with another person. We are getting all the aspects, and we're finding the through line. Is that okay so far?
Yes. Yes, that's good. Yeah.
And so, and then what I take the Platonic idea to be is there is not only a through line for each thing, there's through lines like between levels of being. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right. So I'm trying really hard here.
Yeah.
And so there, you can think, in fact, that in some way an electron is, right, what the intrinsic nature of the electron is never caught up in any of its appearances or aspects. It is the no thingness that is the through line of all of those appearances of the electron. And that's exactly what you're trying to put your finger on with the intrinsic nature.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, that's a very good proposal. Yeah. And to try
And
to
then,
go ahead.
and then the way the electron is caught up in that, right? And we have to use temporal language for something that's ontological, right? Right. Is something that we can have an equivalent sense of when we commit the through line that we call ourself, the through line of all of our psychological aspects and appearances, to the through line of anything. And that is to be caught up in its beauty. But it's not that the electron is experiencing beauty, it's that the electron is instantiating a beauty, and we can experience it by also instantiating it in a kind of participatory knowing. That's what I'm trying to suggest.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with that. I think it's even, maybe there are other like intermediate examples that we can use as well. I mean, when you were using your, I don't know what it was exactly, but you had this object
TV
there.
remote. It's a TV
Yeah.
remote.
when you have this remote, this is like the love that you can have for a remote is obviously not the same kind of love that you can have for a person, but still, even for created things that are simple like this, there is a kind of love that we can have for them to perceive them correctly.
Exactly. I can put, and this is, Heidegger's point and right, and Collingwood's point, I think, I can take and I don't mean this in the romantic sense, I can take an artistic stance towards this, on which it goes from being this it that is complete and I can grasp. Instead, I take a being mode relationship to it, which is, again, properly felt within love, right? I take a being mode relationship to it, and then it's the through line and the inexhaustibleness of it. That's often what a work of art will do. Think about Van Gogh, as Heidegger said, painting the shoes, and we suddenly realize, oh my gosh, all of this is going on, and there's something, right? There's something beyond any particular angle or appearance of the shoe. Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. And then maybe another way to stress the way that this can help us avoid some of the troubles of panpsychism is, love seems more fundamental than consciousness, and we can probably say,
well, it has to be,
yeah,
given what I said earlier about the developmental pathway, right?
Yeah.
Right. It is. It's more fun. And this is what I've also been trying to get at when I think of, when I try to emphasize how dialogos, right, or at least the primordial aspect of it, is before narrative. Narrative involves agents. This is something that makes agents possible in a profound way. And I think this is analogous, but not analogous, but that's the wrong word. It's integrated with an argument that a lot of people are making, from Jennings through Shilbrek and others, that ritual is not reductive to myth, because ritual is where we properly go from grasping and manipulating things to taking a stance so that we're trying to disclose them through this participatory way of knowing. And then there's, I'm reading a book right now, really good. Where is it? Oh, I can't find it. I had it right beside me and it's not there. But it's by Williams and Boyd, and they're talking about both ritual aesthetics and ritual knowledge, and they're trying to get at this procedural, perspectival, participatory way in which we can get what Schilbeck calls ritual metaphysics. There are things that are disclosed to us in that fashion. But the thing and what it's more on about is it's a different kind of metaphysics. It's not like it's orthogonal, but it's a different kind of metaphysics than the metaphysics we are getting at when we are starting from the scientific ontology, right? It's a metaphysics more of it's a metaphysics of orientation rather than a metaphysics of measurement, if I can put it that way. I'm trying to articulate something. Sorry, I'm talking too much. I should
No,
shut up.
that's good. I mean, it's such a difficult subject to try to grapple with. Let's say maybe coming back to the TV remote you were using earlier.
Yes.
Let's say when you let's say are in proper relationship to that remote, when you love it and you allow it to disclose itself correctly,
Yes.
like you can then say that the remote is participating in love as well.
It is. But I want to put it the other way. I want to put that my love actually conforms me to something in it that is only disclosed if I take the orientation of love, right? That's what I want to say. I like, because I want to be able to do well. I mean, I think you do too. You want to be able to get this so that it can reach down to the very bottom and to the very top. And I totally agree with you, by the way, with the argument that consciousness, this is one of, and you know, you and I've done this. This is why consciousness doesn't seem to be the right thing, because it doesn't seem to be able to be at the very top or the very bottom. And so I'm trying to get a notion of love that isn't bound up with consciousness, so that it doesn't fall prey to the same criticism. That's what I'm really trying to emphasize, right?
Yeah, that, because let's say the love that the child has for the mother is different from the kind of love that this child will have when it's 30 years old.
Yes.
Like there's a kind of scaling that will happen. Like the love of the child will be transformed. It is at a more, it's at a more potential level, you can say, when it is an infant.
Exactly. And that love the child has had is ultimately also, even in that more primordial state psychologically, it's ultimately based on the love within the child's biology, the way all the cells love each other, right? But we like, again, we don't want to get panpsychist about this. We're trying to get about, well, no, but there's a way in which things are wanting that, right, is really powerful and makes love possible. But love is also something that gives us a great window into this wanting. That's what I keep trying to want to say.
Yes. And another way to stress, I think the difference is it's really hard for me to see, coming back to the extremes that we mentioned earlier, it's really hard for me to see how potential could be conscious, like how it could have anything to do with consciousness, but it's really easy for me to see potential as loving what is bringing it towards a certain form. Like if
there's a way in which it's drawn, right? So one of the arguments I give for an interpenetrating emergence and emanation is the symmetry argument. So the symmetry argument goes like this. Emergence has the problem of explaining how the normative wholes emerge and have an existence above and beyond the constituent parts, right? And that's the problem. And, you know, Bernardo Kastrup that's what he hammers on when he, right? But the problem, there's a reverse problem for emanation, which is how does the absolute one ever differentiate and instantiate, right? And you see the classic Neoplatonists really like, and I was influenced by Gerald Katz in the Metaphysics of Meaning way back in the 80s, when he said, look, these arguments are symmetrical. And there's any argument you give to try and privilege one over the other is just pretending that these argue. And so for me, they are absolutely interdependent. That's the conclusion I've drawn from it. And so for me, the bottom being drawn to the top and the top being drawn to the bottom are like primordial, foundational. They are, right. And if you look in our cognition, the bottom up and the top down aspects are completely interpenetrating and constantly drawing each other, right? And that's what I want to point to. And I want to say, and love is a way of getting into the being mode that discloses that. Logos is a way of following our intelligibility that discloses that. Light is, right, a symbol of how energy and intelligibility come together, right? And of course, life is also this primordial bottom up, top down thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
I don't want to just. I'm really, I'm passionate about this, but I'm also very like I'm very exploratory about it. I don't want to come across as like I'm telling you. I'm really trying to.
No, but that's very good. You make very good interventions, and it brings many thoughts. But I do struggle to bring things into better light, I would say, because let's say when you were speaking about the two extremes as being really like bound up together, the emergence and the emanation all like being bound to one another. Okay, it's hard for me not to see this as love, like the way that these two can be different and yet united, and necessarily so.
That's right. But again, it's a notion of love completely removed from consciousness, experience, etc.
Yep.
And in that sense, it's like a notion of logos that's removed from any particular language that we might speak. It's a notion of life that's removed from any sort of particular instance of life, right? Right. As I said, love and light and logos and life are instances of this rather than them all being instances of love. Or I'm trying to get I keep wanting pressing on which way it goes, right? Now I want to give you I don't want to take something from you, which is right, the greatest of these is love. I get it. This is a central, right, Christian pronouncement. I'm not trying to take that away from you. It's not what I like. I'm trying to get at in what is the nature of its greatness. It could be, right, you could be saying, well, everything is just it's just a version of what I feel when I'm loving, and the electron is like has a tremendous amount of affection and memory for the proton, and it's like that's ridiculous. We don't believe that, right? But for me, I have the phrase that love is its own kind of knowing. Like when you say you can't see it as anything other than love, what is it about love that is the greatest for you? I guess is what I'm trying to get. Why is that? And I totally agree with you. You know, the integration of agape and logos together in Christian Platonism is really profound. So please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to trespass on that. I want to understand, how would you reply to somebody who said, oh, you're just speaking metaphorically?
Yeah, that is, you asked really good, actually great clarifying questions. Why? Well, I think maybe at its deepest, if let's say I want to speak of love, not just at the human level, but I want something that is as general and as general as possible.
Yeah,
I would describe it as what can cause, I don't know if cause is the right word, but I'll go with it for now. What can cause?
well, vertical causation, not horizontal causation. Yes, vertical, ontological, not spatiotemporal. Yes.
Yeah, but cause. I was also not finished with like the words I was going to say. So like that can cause multiplicity and unity to cohere, or maybe so some other way to say it is to allow multiplicity to exist in unity. So that's what we see like in, let's say, the mother and the child, but I think it's true at other layers. And maybe what is most crucial, I think, is that
wow, I see. So you when you say love, you're pointing to the deep issue of the one and the many, how the
Yes.
multiplicity can exist in the one and how the one can exist in the multiplicity.
Yes.
You are actually pointing to the deep interdependence of emanation and emergence. That's what you mean.
Yes. Yes. And so I see, I mean, there are greater and lesser instances of this, but like I can see it in the way that some electrons and protons and neutrons can bond together to form an atom. I can have like electrons and I can have electrons and protons, all these things existing at the same time as I have an atom without reducing any one to the other. And I see the same kind of thing, only much greater in humans, let's say, where the mother and her infant are able to coexist in a way that won't, like, the mother won't dissolve her child into her, and the child also won't just like destroy the mother into himself. The mother will actually afford the growth of the infant so that it becomes as independent as possible, even like they will have greater love from one another to the extent that they support even one another's independence. And like at the greatest of scales, this is the relationship between God and the world, where, as we mentioned earlier, the love that is God can create a world that is distinct from God and yet imitates God in that it is causing almost itself by pursuing God. So I see this relationship between the one and the many going on at all layers, and even somehow in the Trinity, but I can't really talk about what's going on in the Trinity.
Well, first of all, that lines up with what I was trying to get at with the one, right? The one and the many, the many appearances, but there's the through line that goes through them. So what you call love, I generally talk about like as oneing, right? But there's the two, there's right there, which is right, which is simultaneously a procession and a return. And for you, what's at the core of love, the primordial sort of existential core, is that process of integration and differentiation, the simultaneity of what I've elsewhere called complexification. Is that right?
Yeah. I can even maybe give you like this is very Christian, but I think it's still the example that I have like for,
go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So because I really like when I think of love, I ultimately think of the crucifixion. I see a pattern that is sacrificing itself for matter, for potential. And Balthazar even, Balthazar writes about this really beautifully, saying that like all of creation rises up towards Christ ultimately. Like this event of maximal beauty is what attracts all of creation. So you have this love coming down. At the same time, I see love as reaching upwards, and that Christ is just doing the will of the Father. So he is like trying to offer something to the Father. So I see like in that image, I can see how you have sort of a linchpin. You have a love that is able to unite two things that are completely distinct, like God and creation, like the created and the uncreated. There's no logical relationship between the two that you can make, and yet they are united in love in a way that I can see, I can imagine in the crucifixion. So I see the one and the many cohering in love, ultimately in this example of the crucifixion, but I trace it down at everything that exists.
But then it goes towards what I was saying, because that's also a description of logos. Logos is right, that insofar as it makes things intelligible, and right, it is simultaneously the determinative differentiation and the integrative wholeness, right, oneness. The text is broken up, the word speech breaks things up but unites them, so a deeper depth is disclosed, etc. Light is itself invisible, but it differentiates itself into all of the visible things, yet it makes them one in disclosure, right? The same thing. And of course, life, right? Life is very much about, right, differentiation and integration. That's what happens when a zygote is in development. The cells are differentiating and organizing at the same time. So you are pointing to something that I think is actually beneath all of these terms, right? Love, light, logos, and life, right? Is that fair?
I don't know. Is it, sorry, when I'm pointing to love, I'm pointing to something that is
No,
somehow below.
no, I think what you're pointing to
Mhm.
is what I'm saying is somebody could equally take the argument you made about love and make it about logos, or make it about light, or make it about life.
Okay, I see, The one and the many, like the point I was
Yes,
making.
exactly. And that
Mhm.
you're trying to point to that. And I think we're in that sense in fundamental agreement,
Mhm.
because this through line, and again,
Mhm.
the no thingness, it's not a thing, right? It
Yeah.
is that which makes things possible, and
Mhm.
both in their actuality and in their intelligibility.
Mhm.
So what is it, what is it then? It for me, no, I'll
Mhm.
state what I'm saying, and then for me,
Yeah.
like I said, the through line, right? What all of these point to is not itself a thing. It is that which makes thinghood possible in
Mhm.
all of its levels and all of its diversity, right? And what is it in the experience of of love? That's what I wanted to say. What
Mhm.
is it experience in our love at the human level that corresponds to the no thingness? So I'll say it a little bit, and I don't mean
Mhm.
anything sacrilegious by this,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I'm asking for your friendship here.
Mhm.
So, and I'm not saying something foreign to the text. Dionysius, for example, describes God as a no thingness, right?
Mhm.
And Maximus does too. Aquinas very much, right? The ocean of being, the ground of being, but not a being, not right,
Mhm.
etc., etc.
Mhm.
Okay, and that is somehow like coming from the very depths and coming. So at all levels,
Yeah.
is that
Mhm.
what in it, in love, human love,
Mhm.
is God, without giving us some sort of silly pantheism, right? I'm
Mhm.
trying to get at when I
Mhm.
am loving another person,
Mhm.
that no thingness should be somehow fundamentally, I want to say present, but present isn't quite the right word,
Mhm.
because it's present for how things stand out, but it should be there in
Mhm.
some way. Do you
Mhm.
understand what I'm trying to get at?
Mhm. Yeah.
So use your mother daughter,
Mhm.
sorry, not mother daughter, use the mother child, mother infant.
Mhm.
And in the way I've tried to phrase it, and I'm going to use these two words almost like the way Spinoza does.
Mhm.
How is God or no thingness there in that loving relationship? Do you understand the question I'm asking? Because I'm trying to go the reverse way, right?
Mhm. Yeah. That's a really good question. I don't know if I can answer it. Um, Maybe let me try to do something slightly different. When you were mentioning the different like wanting or the other ways you add to apprehend the multiplicity and the unity
Yeah.
cohering, I found it interesting because many of those terms didn't have at first the connotation of unity and multiplicity. Let's say wanting, because of the name, maybe it rings more about the one, the unity, to me
Yes, which is
initially.
problematic. I
Yeah,
give it, yes,
yeah.
totally.
But many of the terms that we use to try to talk about ultimate reality will end up putting us in some of those in let's say one pole or another.
Excellent point. Very good. Keep going.
And
Excellent.
Schindler mentions this about goodness and about truth. That if you lead with goodness or truth, so we could say probably logos too. And even logos does that to me. Like my first impression when I think about logos is like equations. That's the Pythagorean
Right.
theorem. That's what first thing that comes to mind. But like if you lead with goodness or with truth, it's easy to fall into a pole or another. So Schindler explains that let's say if you talk about the good, you can fall into a logic where it's about consuming some things, like achieving some ends for yourself. Or if you talk about truth, it's possible to speak to dissociate yourself from some truth that is just out there in the world and in which you don't participate. But
Right.
by leading with beauty, you're able to like encompass both of them. So it will describe beauty as the unity of truth and goodness. The let's say the what underlies and makes truth and goodness cohere. And you can say what allows you to avoid polarities. And I think that's, but I mean, that's at least for me. Maybe for others, when they think of love, they have some other connotation. It doesn't ring as much about the one and the many as it does for me. But that is what it does to me. I think that is what Schindler is pointing to in leading with love, leading with beauty. It allows you to sort of grasp the polarity and avoid falling into one of the other extremes. So if I try to answer your question, I don't know if I can do it with the mother and the child, but let's see, when you were speaking earlier about the fact that this through line, this like whatever is beyond the one and the many, that is not itself a thing. I mean, very transgressively, I think in Christianity, we do also say that it's a thing. Like it is also like, there is also the incarnation. So this, I think maybe it's because of love, again, like that we can say that the ultimate nothingness also does become a thing and is united to that thing in love. And you can't make a logical connection between them. Like there's no logical connection between created and uncreated natures, but they can still both be united in love. So I see this sort of as an example of the way that love can bridge the polarities that we mentioned earlier. It's easy to, like, if you use many of the other terms, it's ultimately Schindler will say that if you understand goodness or truth correctly, you won't fall into a kind of dualism, but still it's easy. It's natural that this will happen. Whereas if you lead with beauty, with love, you won't have this kind of issue. So like I would see the nothingness, the through line that is somehow beyond all of the aspects also, and at also grounds of the aspects and so on. I would see this as also really united as one of the aspects. And I'm not sure how I would then exactly put it in the love between the mother and her infant, but and I mean in Christianity itself, like these things are fluid and not super precise, I think. So when
for sure.
Yeah. So when 2 or 3 of you are gathered in my name, there I am also. It's like when 2 or 3 of you are gathered in agape, then Christ is there too.
Yes.
But it's hard to say how exactly. Like you have Christians in the flesh loving one another who are somehow tied with the incarnation that bridges the chasm we talked about earlier.
Well, when they're gathered in that way, and they take the right orientation towards each other and to the relationship between appearance and reality, which is beauty, then there's a through line that emerges in the dialogos that is analogous to the through line that emerges in perception, but it's of a higher order. Right. And so, and Skari talks about beauty that way. She says, what happens when I see the beautiful tree is all the other trees, right? Like folk come into this. I didn't realize trees could be like that. And so all of the trees are here, but this is a new possibility for trees that I had never seen before, right? And the one and the many are interrelated in beauty in that way. And so I'm trying to put these together, right? What you're saying, like the 2 or 3 are gathered in my mate. There's a sense in which, right, for me, I'm going to fall into language that I've used before. There's the moreness of the through line, but the suchness of its unique, instantiation in here now together, right? And you're trying to point to it's both of those together in a powerful way. That's what I'm hearing you say. I want to remind you that Schindler says it's the primacy of beauty, the centrality of goodness, and the ultimacy of truth. They all have a different way of having priority.
Yeah.
And for me, I guess maybe I'm trying to get close to trying to see if I could do it in my own right. There's right, and even that trinity or trilogy, right, is a one mini. That's the whole point about the convertibility of the transcendentals, right? And each one has a way of being primary. Beauty is primary, goodness is central, and truth is ultimate. That right, again, brings out the multi-aspectuality in a through line, right? Again, even at that at the transcendental. So God is the through line of the transcendentals in that way. Which I hadn't thought of before, which is really a kind of cool way of thinking of God.
I think that's the Trinity too, like the fact that God himself is one and many at the same time, and there are people who like will attach some of the transcendentals more directly to certain of the persons.
Yes,
so there's the logos, which is obviously more with Christ. You have goodness that is goodness would probably be more the Father, and then beauty with the Spirit. Or I mean, different people have proposed different things.
Yes.
But the fact that,
and I'm wary of those mappings because they don't map I think the convertibility of the transcendentals and the through line that is not any transcendental, I think is a very powerful, I think there's something analogous in the Trinity, but I'm very wary of trying to do the mapping. But I was trying to get that and then bring it back into the mother-child. So what I hear you saying is that there is, right, there is, I'm going to use gerunds because I don't want to indicate just right, there's truthing happening, there's beautification happening, and there's gooding happening, right, between the mother and the child, and there's a through line between all of those transcendental dimensions that is not itself, right, any one of them, and that's actually present in the relationship between the mother and the child. Is that close to what you were pointing to? That's powerful. I hadn't thought about that. That, you know, what's happening with the mother and the child in the creation, the co-creation, the participatory creation of a person are fundamental, right? There's fundamental ways in which reality is realizing itself as truth, goodness, and beauty, but there's a through line in there that is not truth, goodness, or beauty, but the through line of them that is deeply also in the relationship between the mother and the child. That means, and then that lines up with, there's something ultimately mysterious in the positive sense of the word of a person, right? You never, if I'm in a being mode with you, but I can be with, but there's about people, they have a capacity to constantly draw me beyond myself. Right, like if you ever say to your wife, "I finally got you," there's no mystery to you anymore. Your love for her is actually dead, right? Sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but I'm trying to bring this together. I'm trying to
that's good.
Get that how in the mother-child relationship we can see really primordial, profound things happening, and that there's ultimately a through line of the three transcendentals in that relationship.
Yeah, I think powerful. And I think, I mean, do you think we could take it lower too? Where, because another way maybe to speak about the mother and the child is also to think about all of the layers that are involved in that.
Yes, totally, totally.
At the same time as the mother is bringing her infant into consciousness, into personhood, into love, it's also bringing all of the matter of the child, you can say, into this relationship. It's
all the life of the child, right? You take light to be sort of consciousness, right? It's bringing the life, the consciousness, the logos, the intelligibility, the intelligence, the intellectus, right, of the child into being, right? Yeah, but it's both, right? It's both. The mother has to let the child indwell her as well, right? It's a reciprocal thing of indwelling and internalization, right? The child can only internalize the mother because the mother allows the child to indwell her, and also vice versa, right? It's this mutual, and that's also what I was getting a sense of when you were trying to talk about the many and the one, the way, you know, there's a mutual indwelling and internalization going on. But, you know, you could possibly see that even at the level of physics between entanglement and all that stuff, where there's an, you know, things are in each other in a way, in a radical way that we are only beginning to understand right now.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, on the other side of the spectrum, at the same time, like if you think of the forms that are involved in that exchange between the mother and their child, it also reaches extremely high, because there's some like looping that is going on, as you gestured at too, like the fact that the mother is precisely more a mother to the extent that she's receiving the child into herself to mirror the child back directly. There's that is such an abstract immaterial thing that is taking shape in the mother and in her child, and uniting really like all of the, like both extremes of creation, something super abstract immaterial, like a pure kind of love, with something very concrete, very material. Like this meeting that happens, like somehow this meeting that happens in any created thing, like it's, I think, more obvious in the mother and the child, but I think you can see it in particles cohering together into an atom. Like this meeting of the both extremes in one concrete thing is love.
But the meeting's at all level, right? The problem we get at is we tend to, we have tended to be very simplistic and think of the bottom as that which receives and the top, right? And that's not quite, like we said, the looping, it's more like this. Right, at all levels. It's kind of vertical reciprocal opening, if I can put it that way. That's very powerful. I don't have any challenging questions. I mean,
that was challenging enough. It's
what I mean is, there's no questions that come from a place of potential disagreement. All of my questions were adductive questions. I was trying to draw out something that I could hear. There was a profundity there, and I wanted to draw it out, and I wanted to clarify it, and I wanted to distinguish it from, he's not just speaking metaphorically, and he's not doing some crypto animism, right? And he's not sort of creeping back into panpsychism. There's something beyond all of those, and I was trying to get that articulated very, very properly. And I think we've done that together.
Thank you. Yeah, you asked really great questions, and it's maybe one thing I find curious that I'd like to have your opinion on as well is, like, in studying this specifically, I find it much more inviting of the world, I would say, like by putting so much ontological weight on love, on connection with other things. It makes me like it almost destroys immediately my, well, doesn't destroy, but integrates my tendency to abstract and to theorize about things, and makes me like want to apply this concretely in the world somehow. It reconnects things. So I'm not, I don't think it had been as, I don't think it had ever been as clear to me studying something that I need to apply this somehow, that I need to try to live it out and grow into it before I can think more about it. But maybe you already had like this experience with other things, because I didn't realize that you connected wanting and these other terms with what I call love. So like concretely, like how connected do you see this theorizing that you're doing at the moment with the different things that you're doing concretely in your life?
That's exactly the right question. And this goes back to something I said at the very beginning of this sort of social media YouTube career, which is, don't tell me what you believe, tell me what you practice. Because I mean, there's a lot here about this is involving the non-propositional kinds of knowing, and it's transformative and aspirational, and not just informative and descriptive. even explanatory. It's beyond that. Yeah, for me, like even the work I'm doing with, with Guy Senstock and Christopher Mastapietro and Daniel Zaruba and Johannes Niederhauser about eidetic adduction and dialectic into dialogos. It's all about, no, I don't want this to be abstract theorizing, right? And the discussion I had with Robert Gray and Eric, oh, what's Eric's name? I keep forgetting it, last name, recently posted on Robert's channel, about to make this a living thing, a way of life. It's all in response to that point that if you, I use the joke, right? At the end, you don't want to just read the Kama Sutra, right? Since we're talking about love, you don't want to just read the Kama Sutra, right? Because if you only read it and you never actually practice it, you're not really knowing what love is. And it's the same kind of thing. I think the theorizing is valuable insofar, I like to say theory is always in service of theoria. It's always in service of, right? The original meaning of theoria was not theorizing. It's a transformative, contemplative conformity, right? And so if you don't do that, if you don't make that connection, then the very, look at what we're saying here. The possibility that meaning, the kind of meaning that people are talking about in meaning in life and reality realization, the way reality unfolds, actually have the possibility of a deep relationship with each other. That's what we'd be basically saying here.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately Plato's promise of the good, that the depth of intelligibility and the depth of reality have an ongoing real potential to be wedded to each other inexhaustibly. But if you don't put that into practice isn't the deep enough term, but it's the best term I have right now. If you don't put it into practice,
if you don't incarnate it, maybe,
well, I mean, like, again, we have to have the conversation about incarnation, embodiment, and incorporation at some point. Three different ways about talking about something similar in some way, or maybe the same, but then there's no wisdom to it, right? So for me, I am ultimately doing all of this. If theorizing doesn't connect to theoria, if theory doesn't connect to theoria, the knowledge won't be connected to wisdom. And then for me, what's the point? Right? What's the point? And in the end, I want all of what we are doing, all of this eidetic adduction and dialectic into dialogos and philosophical fellowship, et cetera, all this stuff that work on the imaginal, and right? For me, it's in service of wisdom. And so if you were not putting it into practice, and I'm sort of dumbfounded, because I want to say wisdom is not optional. It's not optional, because right, we are always threatened by self-deceptive, self-destructive, and that's what robs meaning in life. But we have the possibility, perhaps guaranteed to us in this fundamental ontology, of the real possibility of the love of wisdom, right? And so I'm not denying that people can make that choice. What I'm saying is, in fact, I think significant numbers of people do, because of history and culture and their own idiosyncratic development and trauma, etc. But it's always ultimately, for me, an unjustifiable choice.
And I ask this too because I'm almost shocked that by the time, let's say, it took me to see it so concretely and to be able to give a good argument for it, and that I needed the language of love, seemingly, to like really connect theory and theoria for myself. Even having spent a lot of time in Neoplatonism, well, a lot of time, a significant amount of time, hundreds or thousands of hours, let's say, in Neoplatonism, before making that connection very explicitly. So I'm just surprised by how long it took, and especially since for you, the connection seemed to come from wanting or the logos or other terms that aren't as closely directed to love. I'm curious.
But TP, I'm much older than you, and so I've had a much longer time to be foolish and be an idiot and fall prey to vice and realize my distance from the virtues towards which I aspire. So you're seeing right. It's like, yeah, this is not something that has come easily or readily to me. The fact that I am now so passionately participating in it, right? I mean, this is where Spinoza, the most excellent things are rare, right? This is how he ends the ethics. And so, well, I mean, I have been and I, of course, in ways that I'll only know when I'm 70, but I have been looking back, I have been so foolish in so many ways, and so distracted and so displaced and so distorted by my faults and my vices, and that I think the opposite question is how did it actually ever possibly come to me to the degree that it has. This is for me why I don't, and even saying that is now thwarting what I want to say, which is I don't want to take credit for it. I think the proper ongoing attitude is a grateful humility. And so I don't think you should, I don't know if I'm mishearing you, but don't frame the time it took you as anything aberrant. I think that's exactly what it has to be.
Thank you. That's good. And that's very, very generous. But I'm also asking almost in a technical way for like what can connect the dots for people. It seemed for me it was like this kind of ontology of love that I see in Balthasar and Schindler connected with other things. So for you,
I would
do
put
you
it
know?
to you that it's not just that. I'm not dismissing that, but I think, and I think it's also the conversations, the living dialogues, and the meta dialogues between all the dialogues that actually also is a very significant factor in you coming to the realization. I'm not saying that the ontology, right, that didn't play a role, but I think all of this dialogos, the way I talk about it, right, has also been a very significant factor. And I think if you were just to walk out to somebody on the street and present them the ontology, it's like it's not gonna take, right? So I think that I'm asking you to widen the field of your attention and note all of the, you've been, and you've been honorable in it. I'm not trying to dismiss, you've been an honorable, like you've come and you've really shown up in these dialogues and in this dialogos. And I think that is as much, if not more, an explanation how you came to the realization, other than just sort of the metaphysical structure of the ontology.
Yeah, that's good. That's a very good point. Thinking about all of the time I spent like studying you, studying Jonathan, speaking with you, speaking with Jonathan, with others as well, like reading tons of stuff. And it's easy to think only, let's say, with the metaphysics I ended up with, and not about the process that led to it. So yeah, good point. All right, very good.
I think this is a good place to bring it to a close, my friend.
Yes.
I really thank you for accepting the invitation. I think this was very valuable. I really, I really. Let me know when you post this. I'm gonna post about it and promote it and get people to take a look at it.
Thank you. Yeah, I really want to thank you as well, John, for really all of those years. Like, if I think it's been 3 years or thereabouts since we've been speaking, and I had listened to many of your videos for even before that, and it's I have no idea how long it would have taken me, or if I ever would have made it without these conversations. So thank you again, and thanks for all the support and all of the encouragement, I must say, as well, like throughout all of those videos and for this video in particular. So thank you, John.
You're doing great things. You're doing great things. I mean, and And the fact that you and Jonathan have found each other, I think, is also a really great thing. You're more than welcome. Uh, like I said, thank you. I really appreciate the openness and the good faith you bring to our conversations. And if I can help people to, I don't know, quicken the pace at which they can come to realization, then that would make my life more meaningful. And so thank you for sharing that. I'm as grateful for people's sharing of that with me as they are of me affording it for them. There's been crucial moments in my life when people I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be self-aggrandizing, but there's been moments when people afforded me pivotal moments so that I was turned in the sense of metanoia away from despair towards the love of wisdom. I want to do that, afford that as much as I can for other people. And so when people say that my work has done that for them, then that is deeply encouraging to me.
Great. Well, that's the conclusion.
Yes.
Thanks for coming. Thanks everyone for listening. And I'll stop the recording now.